Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to this webcast, Eliminating Chaos from Purchase to Pay, Causes and Solutions to the Butterfly Effect. There's a lot of you joined us from around the world, so very pleased you're all with us, whatever time of the morning, evening, or day it is with you. Some of you will be aware of this reference to the butterfly effect, and some of you may be a little bit confused. So really this came about from a discussion around that whole idea of chaos theory, where a philosopher, I believe, once detailed that when a butterfly flaps its wings in the Amazon rainforest, a thunderstorm occurs on the other side of the world, and there's some long cause and effect relationship between the two. And it dawned on us in our research we've been doing for 2 to 3 years now in the purchase to pay cycle, that there is a similar effect in our end-to-end processes, where things that happen early on in the process have an asymmetric effect later on, and sometimes it's a challenge to work out what's going on. So welcome, thanks for joining us. This is a 45-minute webcast. We're going to try and keep it to that. We appreciate your time. We're going to be taking questions as we go through. So you will see on your GoToWebinar panel, you will see on your desktop or your mobile device, you will see a panel that allows you to ask questions. So please ask questions as we go through. The more, the merrier. It makes this much more useful for you and for us. We'll endeavour to answer them at the end. Those we can't, we'll do by email afterwards. But ask them as you go through, even if we capture them later. So that's by way of brief introduction. My name is Dan French. I'm founder and CEO at Consider Solutions. So many of you I have met or spoken to. So very pleased to be here. I'm very happy to be joined by Steve Rooney, who's leading PDP process work. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
So what we're trying to do here today is share the results of this purchase to pay survey. And I know we've had some great response to the survey. I don't know how many of you specifically on this webcast have responded to it. But it's kind of an interesting view. So we're giving you some feedback from that. And we've had some excellent responses. We're going to use that to explore some of the challenges and enablers in the PDP process and discuss lessons learned and how can we exploit quick wins. The survey is still going, so these are interim results. So if you haven't yet done the survey, think, oh, I don't need to bother anymore. That's not true. You still need to bother. We're getting such great input from this. We want to keep this open to make sure this is as rich as possible. There's about 150 organizations that participated so far, so pretty good results. We want to go further than that. And as I say, it's from people around the world. It's from every continent on the planet. So it's kind of great news, all large organizations. So a little bit of introduction or context, if you like, to us at Consider Solutions. Many of you know us, as we have clients on here as well, so you'll know exactly what we're about. But our view of our aspiration, or the work we do, kind of helps our clients' aspirations to achieve world class, not just in finance, but all core operational processes, which obviously in the P2P world includes procurement. So we're looking at helping, or aspiration to world class is about driving better business results, reducing the cost of operations, better cash flow, and optimizing risk management. On the right-hand side, you see these pillars: financial control and compliance, risk management and process, transformation and optimization. And that's our focus today, the right-hand pillar. And obviously, you can't do anything meaningful without technology and data. So that's just a little bit of our kind of framework, or our lens that we look at the world through. And of course, a lot of our opinions and views are not really just ours. They're influenced by large organizations around the world, and these are some of them. And so those of you on the call, thank you very much for being here. But you'll recognize a lot of those logos and names. And it's working with these folks that give us some of the insights that have driven this survey. So I've given us an introduction. Going to talk to you a little bit about the survey feedback. As I say, if you have any colleagues or peers in industry you think should participate in it, we want to get their feedback as well, because it's not over. Going to talk about the responses to those that feedback, and driving end-to-end collaboration as part of one of the outcomes of this, and some conclusions, and then we're open for Q&A. So as I say, ask the questions as you go through, don't be shy, keep them coming. So 3 years plus of research, and this recent survey, as I say, has been very very interesting feedback, and we've had some great comments about the sort of the nature of the questions. So if you've done the survey, in fact, whether you've done the survey or not, the survey, contrary to most surveys you get around this topic, it's not really focused on a particular point of view. It's not designed to support a narrative or a particular, marketing campaign or anything. We're genuinely trying to understand the barriers to end-to-end process. I mean, real soup to nuts process effectiveness, because we know in the world we're moving into, in a more digitized, faster response world, we know end-to-end processes are key, and we know this is a big challenge. So what's been good about this is we've got some very interesting perspectives across the cycle. So we'll start to see some of that. But first of all, I've got a question for you. Have you actually taken the survey? Because we know a lot of people have, but we don't know people who are on this webcast have. So could you just say, do you know what survey I'm talking about? If you know what survey I'm talking about and you've taken it, the P2P challenges survey, just say yes. If you haven't, or you don't know what I'm talking about, just say no. Very simple. And that's all we're going to ask you for. So it's not the start of a massive interrogation. Just want to know, so it helps us guide how much we tell you about the context behind this. So let's have a look at that. It's a very simple question, so you should be about done now. So let's have a look. So a lot of you haven't taken a survey, so you have no idea what I'm talking about. That's great. So, well, you are not. So this 14% of you have, so thank you. Those that haven't, I do suggest you take it, because it's going to make some of what I say even more relevant. So we're going to share that. We're going to share with you at the end of the webcast. But we're going to give you the feedback from what other people have said. And there's a large body, so it's kind of interesting, large body of responses. So looking at purchase to pay, source to pay, and of course we have these different views of what the end-to-end process is. But our little schematic here for the end-to-end process starts with demand in the business through sourcing of appropriate suppliers for the right categories of service and material, contracting those suppliers, ordering, that's purchase requests through ordering, there's fulfillment, getting what we've ordered, and settlement, which is essentially paying and settling up for what we've had. And whether you take the full view of that as an organization, as source to pay, or whether you, different parts of the organization, you might look just at source to contract. If you have a procurement focus or sourcing focus, you might take a requisition to pay or purchase to pay focus on the right-hand side. And many of you in shared services tend to have a purchase to pay or even invoice to pay view. But there's a lot of participants and stakeholders in this. So this is kind of the context of the whole conversation. We know, without a shadow of a doubt, organizations that are going to be best prepared for the future, and even today, are going to have a really good understanding about how the end-to-end process works in the organization and make that as seamless as possible. So that's the context we're talking about. That's what we shared in the survey. Talk to you a little bit about who responded. As I say, a large number of respondents, 150 organizations so far. And what was, first little bit of perhaps surprise almost, the scope of role of people who responded, and this was circulated widely with no particular focus on job role, but a very high percentage, the biggest single percentage, were those people who have an end-to-end source to pay responsibility. So not a purchase to pay, not a source to contract. So a third of the people have full end-to-end responsibility, or scope, certainly. So that's kind of interesting. Second biggest group was the purchase to pay classic cycle, an invoice to pay accounts payable, and the smaller group, or one of the smaller groups, in fact there were several much smaller groups than that, but source to contract, procurement only. So that gives you some of the essence of how these responses came to be. So that's kind of part of it. And obviously, as we get more responses, there's changes. And then another little interesting point, what primary support system do these folks have to support their purchase to pay, source to pay process? No big surprise that SAP's at the top. No big surprise, Oracle second. Obviously, Ariba is up there, obviously as a P2P suite, as a primary response, as a primary support system. Microsoft Dynamics, PeopleSoft, Coupa, again as a P2P suite, and a number of smaller ones there. But that just gives you a view of the large number of, the kind of range of responses. Maybe that matters, maybe it doesn't, but I wanted to share some of the context with you. Now, For the 15 or 18% of you who've done the survey, you know all these questions, and for the rest of you, you don't. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time because I'm going to encourage you to do the survey. But one of the big points was we're asking, what are the key pain points and challenges that limit your effectiveness in end-to-end source-to-pay or purchase-to-pay process? So we gave a lot of choices, so something like 27 different choices as major issues. So they addressed leadership and governance issues. You'll see there in the top few there on that slide. You'll see, and a lot of this thing about governance and alignment and priority, is up there. And then the whole issue of procurement as a process, the governance and management of multiple channels, driving down the cost of process operation, reducing or making buying simple, just making it easy for people, contract visibility, contract compliance. Those were not some of the issues. Another set of issues are related to do with performance management, KPIs. What do we do based on our KPIs, and what visibility do we have to take early decisions based on data? And then the question about maverick spend categories, and again, focus over, do we have enough visibility over our supplier and category spend and performance? So these are very much, if you might regard as end-to-end process issues or front-end process issues. And then continuing down this line, a lot of those issues that started to become very apparent at the invoice to pay end of the process. So challenges ensuring master data is complete and accurate at setup and over time. Now, there's a classic case of the butterfly effect in that when we take on new suppliers, new vendors, we need to get them approved and taken on and contracted, but we also need to get core data about them. And if we don't do that at the early stage, it has an asymmetric effect on the back end process when we start trying to match POs and invoices and all the rest of it. However automated our systems are, if our master data isn't good, we got a big problem. So late payment, early payment. So most people talk about paying on time. That doesn't just mean about not paying late, it also means not paying early, because that's obviously a waste of money. PO compliance, are we ensuring POs are used in advance or relevant spend? Error rates on POs and invoices due to manual effort, those also due to automated technologies we're using. Then queries and support desk or help desk effort, and payment rejections and returns and some others. So there's a fairly broad range. This is just one of the early questions. So just to give you a snapshot, and as I say, it's a snapshot, it's not the full data. If you complete the survey, you're going to get the full report and a full analysis. And currently it's interim, so you can still fill in the survey. But the big, we want to ask everyone to identify the top 3 pain points from their perspective in the end-to-end purchase-to-pay process. And the biggest winners out of that, if you like, were number 1. So 40% of people said one of their top 3 was a lack of executive alignment and understanding of P2P challenges across the process. So hopefully that's self-evident, but it's the resonance that do our accounting shared services folks have a similar view of the end-to-end process as our sourcing and procurement folks, as our business units who are trying to get stuff done, as our manufacturing who are trying to get direct materials. And of course, a large number of people feel that is not well aligned. Second one, a lack of clarity on overall accountabilities, responsibilities, expertise, and work. That's about governance of the process, which is very related to the top one. So this is a very interesting link point. The next biggest one was lack of contract visibility. Do we know what we've agreed for all suppliers and contracts? So it's an interesting point. That's across the piece. And then the fourth was poor PO compliance, ensuring POs are used in advance of all relevant spend. So some of that might be a surprise to you, might not be a surprise to you. Certainly, some of that resonated with a lot of the work we've done over the past years. So that's kind of an interesting viewpoint. And then we asked the question, of those issues, where's the greatest management attention spent to try and rectify these things or trying to address improvements? And interestingly, the single biggest observation, although it was all over the map, as you can see from that chart, was that management are mostly attending to the lack of executive alignment and understanding of the P2P challenges across the process, which is kind of an interesting point of view. It's good news, clearly. So it gives some indication that we're trying to address these issues. Second one, again, lack of clarity and overall accountability. So the governance piece, that's good. That's what we want management to attend to. Interestingly, the third one that management are really attending to is driving down the effort and cost of process operation, which doesn't necessarily relate to the broadest view of where the real issues are. So that's kind of quite interesting. So it might lead you to believe that we might be looking at a symptom rather than a cause, but it's worth, you'll see the detailed results if you've participated in the survey. You'll see all that. But hopefully it'll give you some food for thought. Then we said, from a perspective of the front end of the process, procurement, source to contract. So from identifying vendors, choosing selected vendors, contracting with them for the key high value relationships. What are the top 3 challenges? And these were problems with defining and maintaining, managing spend categories. So how do we identify the types of spend that we are going through? That's kind of interesting. Second one is lack of contract visibility. We heard that before, so that's a big recurring issue. And then contract compliance. Do we know we're getting the terms we agreed? Now, there's some interesting views here about whether, you're going to see this in the detailed analysis, but whether these views are expressed by those people who have a source to contract responsibility, or whether it's these views expressed by the broad group of respondents about the source to contract responsibility. So it could be a subtle difference here. But either way, I think you may resonate with some of that. If you fundamentally disagree with it, you should be doing the survey. If you agree with it, you should be doing the survey. So basically, you have no excuse. So those are some of the things to think about. And this starts to make you think about what are the things we need to do to really make this process sing. Invoice to pay or accounts payable, what are the top 3 challenges? You might wonder why there's 4 here. So we asked the question for each respondent to highlight the top 3 challenges, but I've shared here the top 4 in the analysis because they're kind of all interesting and all big and fairly chunky. The number 1, which I have to say I was even a little bit surprised about. So more than half of the people said one of the top 3 issues is avoiding late payment and early payment, as we talked before. So that remains an issue. Again, is that a symptom or a cause? I think most of us know that late payment is usually the symptom of other issues about the processing time of getting invoices in, be able to match them to POs, and making sure that we have valid master data. But still, it's really important. That's regarded as a top issue. Number 2 is poor purchase order compliance. So making sure we have purchase orders used in advance of all relevant spend. 32%. Then a high percentage of duplicate invoices and exceptions. Now, this surprised me, to be honest, because that's a third of people said that's a top 3 issue. You'd kind of think, with our investment in smart technology, smart controls, and all the rest of it, that this would be a kind of an issue from yesterday, but or last decade, but it isn't. It's still there. And in some respects, the research says it's getting more complex, not any simpler. So we'll see a bit of that later. And the 4th one was fraud risk associated with vendor bank and payment details. So this is business email compromise, people making requests for changes to bank accounts and then finding the person that made the request isn't who they thought it was. So now what's interesting here is we looked at the end-to-end process, we looked at the front end of the process, we're looking at the invoice to pay, accounts payable end of the process. So hopefully, even without seeing all the detail yet, you'll start to see some links here that make some interesting thought processes. The other question, or one of the other questions we asked is, what's your highest priority risk management challenge? So forget the end-to-end process from an efficiency and effectiveness point of view. What are the things you care about from a risk point of view? Number 1, a quarter of the respondents said vendor risk management. So are we managing our risks associated with vendors? Now we're going to dig a bit more deeply into this as part of the follow-on to the research, but this is this about the risk of the vendors not being able to supply us, or the risk to our business of them, or the risk of them with some malpractice? So we've got to get a bit deeper in that. Next one, contract compliance we had before. Third one, invoice cyber fraud. That is the email compromise piece. Basically getting bank details, being bamboozled into making payments to bank accounts you weren't expecting to, or even sending checks to people you weren't expecting to. And the 4th one, internal fraud, which again, maybe surprising, but those are the risk perspectives. And then this one's interesting. So we also asked people, what's the biggest single improvement you've had in your organization, the P2P process in the last 18 months? And yeah, quite interesting. So a quarter of you said, and this was a single response only, a quarter of you said process change. The next one was new technology deployment, which is interesting, good. Cross-functional communication was 14 and 15%. There was improved data analytics, there was organizational structural change, people skills, and changing supplier obligations and responsibilities. Now, you could look at this a number of different ways, but you could say that less than 30% of the biggest single improvements have any relationship to technology or data, and the rest are all related to process, organization, and governance, which perhaps is not a big surprise, but it's kind of worth thinking about. I think it's also surprising that so few people have made big changes related to changing supplier obligations, because there was a big move now to try and make the supplier, the vendor, more responsible for their end of the process rather than us have to do it manually. Anyway, this is kind of an interesting view. With some very useful stuff. I mean, some of these process changes, there was some other suggestions as well to do with new ERP deployments. I mean, in process change, we had newer ERP deployments, PO harmonization. We had a number of different things here. Again, you're going to get the detail as we dig in and we share the analysis. But hopefully that's kind of thought-provoking. If you look at the front end of where effort's being spent, obviously we get a lot of time thinking about technology, but actually, there's a great evidence that a lot of the other stuff is driving a lot of value. So that's us having a look at some of the responses. So what are the responses to that? What do we learn from that? What do we do about it? So as I say, you've got a question panel. Please ask the questions now. You've got all of those interesting thoughts, hopefully. Well, their thoughts, whether or not they're interesting, that's up to you. But if you've got any questions, please start putting them in now. So let's have a look at that. So those are big issues coming out of what we've just seen. There's some interesting observations. So these are the big high-level issues, and there's still a lot of them, but you can kind of break those down into kind of leadership and governance. You can kind of look at issues with process. Is there a process for contract compliance? Do we actually make our contracts easily available to everyone in the business to make sure we are getting what we expected? Spend categories around process and data. Master data is around process and governance. PO compliance is equally about, it's not just about technology, it's also about governance and process. One of the most effective PO compliance strategies I've ever seen is that's making sure that we get a PO for everything, obviously other than utilities, rent and all the rest of it, for every relevant category, so we get no invoices without POs. So one organization did a very low-tech approach to this, which was highly successful. They identified all their suppliers that were in the majority of categories where you did expect a PO, and they sent a repeated communication out to the finance contacts, the accounts receivable contacts, and the sales operations contacts, all of their suppliers, just to say from their CFO that said, we do not accept invoices without a purchase order. Be aware that if your organization undertakes any work or provides any goods or services to us without a purchase order, you will not be paid. You need to understand that. And it had a massive impact. Low tech, highly effective. And you can understand the governance issues in those supply companies. Nobody wanted to get involved in that. And then you've got the kind of the back end issues to do with accounts payable, to do with late payment, invoice challenges, and the fraud and vendor risk management issues. Some kind of interesting categories there. And what we're going to do is draw out of that some of the themes that allow us to kind of work out what the best approaches are. But you can kind of see already something that's coming through out of that. So responses really, from what we can see and talking to folks on the back of the survey, is the alignment between the organizational functions. Winning hearts and minds, both at an executive and operational level, is absolutely key. Having a process that everyone understands and works and has clear outcomes that everyone signs up to. The use of smart automation, not just the most latest automation, but the smart use of your ERP and all the other components you have. Effective data, driving insight from it, and the right talent and skills to support it. And this little pyramid on the right, we used to say things about people, process, and technology. Well, data is a big part of that as well. So those are kind of some of the key things, and we're not going to dig into all of them here, but just worth talking through some of them. So alignment, it came out as the biggest end-to-end process issue. We know it's nothing to do specifically with source to pay, purchase to pay. It happens in every long cycle end-to-end process. It happens in the customer to cash front-end cycle. The people in, the people in marketing and sales in the front-end process and revenue cycle have different performance measures to those people in accounts receivable. The same is true in purchase to pay. In procurement, there are different key performance indicators, different targets on efficiency and effectiveness than there are in accounts payable and in business operations. Now, one thing we know is having multiple lighthouses does not make for a successful trip into harbor. The point is we've got to try and work out through better alignment, what are the set of outcomes and priorities that we all sign up to, such that we have a process that works without handoffs. So alignment is absolutely key, and it comes out time and time again. So think about that, even if you're in the middle of implementing a technology-enabled transformation. Think about that, because the technology isn't going to change that. So alignment, big key issue. And this alignment thing is about the big picture matters. So when we were just worried about task automation, the picture on the left, just making sure we know how to get down that alleyway, do it really fast, that's fine. But if we want alignment, then everybody in the end-to-end process, all stakeholders and all participants need to have the big picture on the right. We need to understand the whole picture, not just our element of it. And we need to understand how all of these levers affect success or overhead. So, for example, a good example of collaborative alignment amongst executives helps focus on priority business outcomes. In this example, the organization felt that by driving a P2P optimization process, they were going to drive down the headcount, maybe, in accounts payable. That's P2P efficiency. And then as they got alignment across all the stakeholders and realized where the real value was, it's not just about saving money, it's also driving value for the organization and getting more for our money. And you can see the relative impact on increasing contract compliance, bringing more spend under control, and of course, paying on time. Some much more significant impacts, and it helps drive a much more successful end-to-end process. So I think there's some interesting thoughts in there. Now, obviously, we talk about transformation all the time. We hear it all the time, and technology is transforming purchase to pay, but pretty much one step at a time. We're putting in, technologies. So we're putting in portals, and we're putting in analytics, and we're putting in RPA, and we're connecting this and connecting that, and that's great. But we've got to think about the end-to-end process and the end-to-end outcomes. So, with regard to technology, this is one of my favorite slides I use all the time. You've got to remember, this is a great Gartner group. It must have been an April Fool's Day joke, but I love it, because wherever you go with any kind of major change in the organization, and technology is a great example, we have this peak of inflated expectations. The new technology is going to change the world. It's particularly relevant in P2P transformation, I have to say. I know a number of you on the call have suffered from that and are suffering from it. This peak of inflated expectations that this is going to solve all our problems. And as we work through it, we slip down this trough of disillusionment as we realize actually life's a lot harder than we thought. And then we crawl battered and bloodied up the slope of enlightenment to a plateau of productivity. Now, this happens with new initiatives, but particularly with technology. And it's important for us to bear it in mind. And our goal has to be to chop the top off that peak of inflated expectations and get a sensible path, as short as possible path to the plateau of productivity. So looking at process, then we've got to think about outcomes, the end-to-end outcomes, and simplification. So we looked at this picture earlier, so I think that's pretty clear. But what we're learning, both from this survey and the other work we're doing, is there's the balancing act. We're massive focus on efficiency and best execution, but we also need to have effectiveness with best decisions. Best decisions across the end-to-end process are going to make a far bigger impact than best execution in a small part of it. If we can get both across the whole end-to-end process, we have a great world-class result. So it's worth thinking about. So the key response to the alignment challenge is this idea of how do we get the stakeholders to collaborate across the end-to-end cycle. So you've seen this kind of end-to-end process picture, demand through the settlement. So we've been taking our own medicine, really, and looking at the process and building some capabilities to help this end-to-end collaboration using some smart algorithms and analytics and some machine learning technology to give us a view on suppliers, working capital, and spend, and our operational performance internally. So we know in most organizations, certainly global organizations, global operation, we've got procurement in head office functions and around the world. We've got suppliers all over the place. We have materials and services being delivered all over our global operations. And we have invoice receipt and payables and settlement in shared service centers in different locations. The point about that is no one person has line of sight over any process execution. So what we're trying to do using machine learning and access to all the data we can get hold of is to provide line of sight. So really help provide collaboration and understanding, not just for the process, but for the participants in it, both internal and external. And I've been given this statistic many times and I refused to believe it until it was backed up by some facts, but I don't think it's true just for finance, but this point here that 80% of finance effort is spent acquiring and preparing data for reporting, with only a very small percentage, 20%, for the value-added analysis and decision-making. And we know from what we've already learned in the survey and what discussed already, that analysis and decision-making is absolutely central. So Hackett Group, who I'm sure you all know, they have a lovely view about digital transformation and a picture here of the key levers. And we've certainly decided to, whilst we operate in all these areas, we decided to put serious effort into the data and analytics piece to enable this Apple Easy, Google Fast, and Amazon customer-centric view. So I'm just going to ask Steve to talk you through a little bit about some of the work we've done with the capability that we have, and then move on to the conclusions. So, Steve.
Yep, thank you, Dan. So, just a brief run through some examples of what we've been focusing on to help with this whole topic. So, as Dan says, the challenge is with greater use of systems, increased geographical spread, increased use of shared services and outsourcing. It becomes increasingly challenging to see what is actually happening, where things are working well and where there are problems. So what we're looking to do is, based on the data within the systems, having a continual view over how we are performing and where there may be exceptions or deviations from the way, in terms of the way the process is working. First of all, our performance. So we've got some examples of key performance indicators on the screen here. So what we're looking to do is to automatically calculate these on an ongoing basis against the real transactions within our systems. So it's an objective measure, not subjective. It's not somebody's opinion. It gives us an immediate indication of how we are performing against benchmarks. So we can see the red, amber, green notation here. So green indicates we're doing well against the benchmark as noted. So we've got good PO compliance in this example, but in some of the other areas, we're not performing quite as well. So the reds, for example, the number of electronic invoices doesn't compare well to some other benchmarks. So this gives us a view of how historic performance and also how we may be performing going forward. So the trends. So as well as the overall indicators of performance, we're looking to give insight into what are the current priorities for attention. So immediate visibility on a day-to-day basis of the exceptions and outliers and possibly costly transactions, but given the information such that there's opportunity to rectify before they can cause damage. So some selected key areas here. If any duplicate invoices have been created, any duplicate payments have been paid, and flagging those up again against thresholds so that we can identify the reds that need immediate attention. So first of all, the high level view, but then the ability to drill down to see the detail. So in terms of the invoices, with our smart algorithms and analytics, finding the duplicates that may not always be obvious. So the examples on the screen here may, on the face of it, don't look like they are obviously duplicates, look like they come from different companies. But if you drill down, then you find out that there are some examples where one company is a subsidiary of another, and both are sending the same invoice in to be paid. And this is not an uncommon situation. Invoices needing rework. So any invoices that need some kind of additional manual effort, which is costing us time, costing effort. And are there any trends around those? So is it certain vendors where we spend more work on than others? Gives us the ability to identify the pattern, facilitate a conversation, potentially with procurement and ultimately the vendor, to find out the root cause of why these issues are occurring with the invoices that's costing us more time. And sometimes automation of the invoice may lead to work that needs to be done to adjust the automatically created invoice before it can be processed and paid. If we look at duplicate payments, again, if for some reason it's actually a payment's been made and we want to know, one, if we've got issues with vendors where we are making such duplicate payments, again, finding out what the root cause is, finding those obscure ones which look like they're coming from different vendors, could be an issue with our vendor master data that we need to look into, and we need to understand the association between those vendor records such that we can address the root cause. Coming on to vendor master data, underpins the end-to-end process. A common theme is challenges with maintaining a good quality in vendor master data, and sometimes the issue is so large it's difficult to know where to start. So many times the work does not get started on how to address the issues we have. And what we're looking to do here is prioritize the challenges we may have with vendor master data, such as duplication, such as poor quality, missing details. Prioritize in terms of identifying those vendors where there is transactional activity. So where we've got a set of duplicate vendor master records and there's invoices and payments against all of the records within the duplicate cluster. So on this particular chart on the left-hand end, we've got a relatively small number of vendors duplicated compared to the thousands within our whole data set. So if we focus on those first, gives us that ability to prioritize and address those that have the biggest impact. Payment terms. So looking at how payment terms are affecting the working capital. So typically larger companies are now paying on average 60 days. And if we can identify those, the trend of use of our payment terms, and if we are paying in shorter time than we prefer to pay, and maybe less than the industry benchmark, then we can address that by identifying the vendors and business units that have those payment terms that are paying faster than we would prefer to. With the data that's being collected, we can get immediate visibility into the vendors where there's most efficiency in terms of the work we need to do to process the invoices and other transactions with those vendors. So incorrect invoices, duplicates, low value, and again, information to facilitate a discussion between the accounts payable group, the procurement group, and ultimately the vendor. So how can we address these challenges? And if we do have challenges with vendor master data and lots of manual processing, then the risk of fraud also increases. Similarly, on the business units, so comparative measure of all of our business units, those that are costing us more time and have significantly greater cost overhead against others. So what's the root cause? Why is it not working so well in some of our business units? And seeing the overall picture of our relationship with our given vendors. So with the transaction data that we have, also gives us the ability to have a dynamically updated profile of the vendors in terms of the level of business we're doing with them, both volume and value, the issues that may be occurring, quality of transactions, the time frames it takes to complete the whole process, and give us a comparison across key vendors. And on the bigger picture, so where are the overall process exceptions? So across the end-to-end process of P2P, from requesting through to fulfillment, through to payment, a range of different analytics, a range of checks indicating patterns within the process where it's again deviating from the process as we have designed it and as we expect it to be executing. Now, typically, to get to that kind of insight, a project-based approach can be used, which can take many months, goes through a whole cycle of working out what the requirements are, getting IT involved, configuring, and ultimately we get the results. And we see that as a challenge in terms of the timeframes needed and before you actually get to the results. So what we're looking to do is to make it much more of a connect and go. So having the smart algorithms, the process aware approach, so that we can plug in using the smart data connection to get the data that's needed, and with the algorithms and the process aware nature of those and the machine learning, get immediate results such that we can reduce that 80% we talked about and get more rapidly towards the making quality decisions based on the information we have.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate we're running up to our 45 minutes. Do ask your questions. If you haven't put the questions in yet, put them in now. Now's your chance. These are 7 ways that these smart analytics that Steve outlined, and he just gave you a snapshot of some elements of it, how they're changing P2P. And I think it's self-evident, but we've talked a lot about collaboration and alignment across the organization, across the business, the vendor and technology silos. And I think the elements of the rest are pretty self-evident. So let's talk a little bit about conclusions. What do we learn from all of this? Well, there's some considerations out of the survey which have been fascinating. That survey is still alive and running, and please, we were going to make sure that everyone gets access to that who's on this webcast if you haven't participated. We continue to get better light on the core P2P issues. This collaborative alignment governance are key. If responses change that, then so be it, but it seems to be a very strong message we're getting so far, not just in the survey itself, but in our conversations with participants. We do know that data insights are providing objectivity, particularly in this collaborative endeavor, where we're not sharing opinions, we're sharing facts based on what's actually going on in the process, which makes a much better basis of this collaborative discussion. Also allows us to understand the nuances by channel, by category, by business unit, by vendor, to really get to the root what the issues are. So the evidence is clearly that we don't really just want to automate today's manual effort. We want to understand really what's going on, get to the root cause of issues at source, isolate those, design in quality at the front end, and then we can automate best execution. So that's a lot of what's coming out, both in terms of best practice and challenged practice from what we're seeing. And what we're seeing in this sequence is really, so often you see organizations saying we're going for a technology-enabled transformation, so we're going to do transformation through a new piece of automation. Invariably, they struggle, fail, spend a lot of money, and end up coming to an early halt. Whereas all the evidence is smart data insight exposes the real process and the real nuances of what's going on. Those facts create a catalyst for collaboration and alignment, and that in itself is what gives you the opportunity for transformation as a foundation for automation. I think that's becoming more and more evident. Doesn't have to take a lot of time, but that sequence is the difference between success and failure. So this is what we've talked through today. I hope you found it useful. Do endeavor to ask any other questions you have. We do have a very specific webcast on source-to-pay transformation coming up with our expert speaker, Mark Miles, on the 9th of April. So please register for that if you're in the transformation space. He's going to give you a lot of experiences from the battlefield. We have some questions from you. If you have questions you haven't had time to put in on the panel, or you want to get involved in these smart analytics and this collaborative alignment, drop me an email and I'll put you in touch with the relevant folks in our team. Quickly regarding questions, let's have a look at the questions we have. Have we got time? Oh, I've got to do one question because it's 45 minutes in, but it'd be rude not to do one of them. But keep asking them. Keep asking questions, because I'm not going to answer them all now, but you will get an email response. So one of the questions has, well, this is kind of, first one is, why do you think alignment and governance are such issues? Well, there's a webcast in itself. I think my personal view is organizations, the businesses we operate, have had functional silos for years, ever since God was a small boy, or small girl even. And we talk about end-to-end processes, but we very rarely in organizations actually have governance and ownership across the real start and finish of these processes. And we know the digital native companies have got that, and we're seeing how that's starting to work. So I think we are hampered by the fact we've got functional lines who own parts of the process and have performance measures related to their function and not to the end-to-end process. That results in different KPIs, different understandings of what's important, and ultimately that's a challenge. It doesn't mean necessarily we have to change the structure of organizations, but we do absolutely have to find a way to collaborate such that all the functional leads supporting an end-to-end process have a common view of what success looks like. I do appreciate your time. We've taken up your 45 minutes. I hope you found it interesting, insightful. Please do the survey if you haven't done it. If you don't have access to it, drop me an email or we will send one to you anyway, hopefully. But if there's any questions or stuff you're not sure about, drop me an email. We're taking more input on the survey, and we will be producing a detailed analysis and report on this. All the evidence is it's going to be quite interesting. I'm going to get some specific comments from some of the participants. And if you want to get hold of that, you got to do the survey. Simple as that. Thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it. Have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Thanks a lot. Speak to you soon.